All right, good. So let's kind of go through this piece here. So Thomas, you've already done a couple of campaigns, which is good. So some of this might be redundant, but basically, um, this is targeted towards a ag focus. Kind of show some of the ag pieces that are there. Some people would say that the Flow Hive is a ag-related crowdfunding campaign. It was done on Kickstarter or Indiegogo. Apologize for that. It was done um, from Australia. And they raised about $13.3 million when they were only trying to raise $70,000 for their beehive concept. So this does fall into the food, beverage, and ag category that you'll see some of the statistics for on each one of these platforms there. So it goes to show that you can actually raise a decent amount of money on a ag platform or campaign, as long as you are creating value for the customer. So everything that you need to do needs to look at it from creating the value to the customers, and those customers could be the donors in this case, could be the rewards based, it could be the donation piece that Thomas mentioned in regards to CrowdRise. GoFundMe would be the major one on that. But at the end of the day, you have to show some type of connection or value to those donors, or in this case, the customers here. So don't forget that. You actually have specific platforms for different industries. There isn't one specific to the ag industry. For the most part, there's Ag Funder in the Bay Area, but they're more towards looking and catering towards the accredited investor as opposed to the non-accredited investor, which is what crowdfunding platforms are meant to be. So this is a platform called Ready Fund Go, which is an ag food crowdfunding platform based out of Australia. You'll see that from an equity standpoint, many of the countries outside the U.S. or many countries other than the U.S. have actually moved quickly towards the equity piece. The U.K. and Australia have been leaders in this. And so if you're actually doing a crowdfunding campaign in those two countries, you can easily do an equity crowdfunding campaign, whereas the U.S., it's been kind of hindered based upon the law. You had the 2012 Jobs Act, and specifically the Title III piece to that Jobs Act that is supposed to help people put money behind companies in an equity fashion. And so you have a certain percentage of someone's income that they can actually put towards an equity piece, where you don't have that many regulations in Australia or the UK for allowing investors to put money behind a concept or a campaign or business. All right. I do want to point out that campaigns are not easy, and they're definitely things that deal with an ongoing activity. So you have activities prior to the campaign that you need to do, like build your videos, write your story, and make sure everything's consistent there. And then you have ongoing activities throughout the campaign and after the campaign. And many people want to pass it on to people other than the founders of the company, but I'm a big believer that the people that are actually doing the product development or should be the ones also leading the campaign, even though it's a lot of that effort and time. So initially, I had this agenda for today's webinar, which was let's go look at what crowdfunding is, the types of crowdfunding that are out there, the summary of the crowdfunding data, which is kind of interesting when you compare it to venture capital funding, and then examples of crowdfunding campaigns where we get into the specifics of what's working, what's not working, and then we go over what the dues are for crowdfunding based upon the data that's been provided over the last 8 years in this space. And then we can talk about the nuances of equity crowdfunding as it relates to donations, rewards, and debt crowdfunding. And Q&A, we'll go ahead and feel free to interrupt me, Thomas, in regards to questions, as well as you, Elizabeth. Whatever you have a question about, please don't hesitate to ask while we're going through this. So the purpose of this is to understand what is crowdfunding and provide enough information for you to intelligently explore this funding option going forward. It's a very new landscape compared to getting a loan or getting angel financing or getting financing from a venture capital firm. And so I'm assuming that most of y'all are taking it from the entrepreneur's perspective here. So just the basics of what crowdfunding is, it's derived from a broader scope where you have crowdsourcing, so you can actually deal with prediction markets, and then how do you come up with a logo? You see that from a crowd perspective, where you get a contest out there, and you'll have 100 people develop a logo, and then the company can pick one. And so crowdfunding specifically from the financial side of things. So it's external funding provided by a group of individuals in the form of donation, rewards, pre-production sales, credits, or equity. And usually this is done via the internet platform. That's what's kind of allowed this funding mechanism to take off over the last 5 to 10 years. So as a professor of mine, my doctoral program, Howard Aldridge would say, is it's democratizing entrepreneurship. And so it's helping more people get their ideas realized and not have it be a gatekeeper setup where you see the venture capitalist control who moves forward and who doesn't. So that's of interest there. So the forms of crowdfunding and crowdfunding platforms, donations, Thomas mentioned CrowdRise. You also have GoFundMe for the rewards and pre-production sales. The known ones are Kickstarter, Indiegogo, Rocket Hub. Debt is Kiva, Prosper, Funding Circle, Lending Club. And then we talk about equity pieces in terms of the Title III of the Jobs Act. And so the Jobs Act was actually implemented in 2012, but you didn't see the Title III approved until basically, let's see, it would be a year and a half ago when that happened. Prior to that, you had interstate laws being put in place because the federal law wasn't in place until the last two years or so. So the ones that I work with are Start Engine, WeFunder, Republic, Indiegogo / Microventures. Other ones would be Offerboard, Circle Up, which is specific to consumer items, Our Crowd, Crowdcube, and definitely a lot more. All right, so something I always want to point out too is understanding why people back projects. I mean, they're providing money to a campaign based upon the perks that or rewards that campaign is going to provide. In many cases, they're not getting any return if they're doing a donation or if they're doing a rewards or pre-sales piece in regards to a monetary return. They might, get a good feeling response back when they rally around friends and they support people they admire. So you get those people that really want to put things into play. So the debt and the equity piece allows you to see a return on your investment. Just so you understand, the debt crowdfunding is probably the biggest piece of the entire market. And so it's something that you need to think about if that's what you want to do. But what happens is it could be harder to get the debt financing as opposed to equity financing. So the question then becomes, where does crowdfunding fit into the funding timeline of a company? Is it actually something that's going to replace angel investors? Is it going to replace venture capital funds invest in your company? Or is it just going to be another option in the pipeline of you investing or you getting your business funded? So that's of interest. The data is not there for either, confirming either one. I'll show examples for both these, the reasoning behind that. So when we look at funding, most people look at venture capital for startups. And so I just want to compare how big venture capital funding is to the crowdfunding piece. So in 2012, in the first 3 quarters of this year, venture capital funding has provided about $52 billion worth of funding. In all of last year, in 2016, you had $61 billion there. So you'll see a trend from 2002 increasing over time in each of the quarters there. And so it's definitely a growing segment, but so is crowdfunding there. So when we actually pull in the 2000 data, which is the tech bubble, you will see that from a venture capital perspective, we're not at the point of where venture capitalists invested in new companies back in the 1999-2000 era. All right, so if you look at the overall numbers of how much has been raised through crowdfunding platforms, it started when we started collecting data was about $2.7 billion in 2012. The last good number that we have for crowdfunding worldwide is 2015, and you'll see that it got up to about $34.5 billion. compared to that 2.7 number in 2012. So out of that 34 billion, $25 billion was from the debt crowdfunding side of things, and then equity crowdfunding was between 2 and 3 billion, and the rest was either donations, rewards, or pre-sales. So the number of, and the World Bank estimates that by 2025 that we'll see about $93 billion raised through crowdfunding platforms each year. In 2015, the crowdfunding platforms in the US were about 600, and then worldwide is about 1,250. That goes back to 2012 where there were only 190 platforms in the US. So you'll see the number of platforms has increased. Also with the regulations in Title III for the Jobs Act, where it requires if anyone wants to put money in an equity fashion or raise money from the entrepreneur's perspective, raise money from an equity crowdfunding campaign, they need to do that through a registered crowdfunding platform. So you'll see platforms start to register and become basically accredited platforms as it relates to regulation crowdfunding campaigns. All right, so some of the stats from one crowdfunding platform, and Thomas, you mentioned you use Kickstarter. So Kickstarter was founded in 2009, and as of earlier today, there was about $3.4 billion pledged to Kickstarter projects. So you compare that to the overall market in 2015. So you're 10% of the market is what Kickstarter's at. So it's the biggest one that's out there. They've successfully funded around 133,000 projects. The total number of backers that have, backed at least one project on Kickstarter is about 13.8 million backers. You will see repeat backers, so people that actually come back and put money into multiple projects or campaigns, about 4.4, and the total pledge is about 41.5 million. So all this stuff is online. Kickstarter is very transparent in what they do, and so it's really neat to see that piece. And being transparent ends up being a big part of this crowdfunding initiative, because if you're not, you'll probably see the crowdfunding markets decline if you have more platforms that are less transparent. But Kickstarter has led the way. So the interesting piece on this slide in regards to data, that almost 36% of the campaigns that go on to Kickstarter are successfully funded. And the interest to that is Kickstarters are an all or nothing platform. So if you ask to raise $10,000 on there, if you raise $9,999, you don't get any of that amount of money that was pledged. So it's an all or nothing platform. If you compare that to Indiegogo, Indiegogo will allow you to actually choose if you want an all or nothing platform or a campaign, or if you want to be able to take whatever money that is pledged. So if you only 15% gets pledged, you can take that money. So there's a higher fee from Indiegogo when you do that. But you have to decide if that's worth it in terms of if you only raise 15% of what you're trying to raise, do you have enough money to actually implement the plan that you have for building that product or working on that project. I bring up food and I highlight that. So when you look at the 15 categories that Kickstarter tracks, food is the let's see, I think it's eighth ranking category of number of projects that are listed on Kickstarter. And so you'll see that they've raised, or they've asked, I should say, for $123.4 million. They've successfully raised $103 million, and they've unsuccessfully had $19.2 million not raised in terms of their ask. So, all right. So I kind of alluded to this in regards to the unsuccessful funds. I mean, in regards to all or nothing, it ends up being a big piece of it. So understand some of this data here, that if you go to that bottom chart there, you actually see that 148,000 projects only receive 1 to 20% of their funds. So if you are going to be unsuccessful, you're either going to get 0% or you're going to get less than 20% funded on that piece there. So that's of interest there. Whereas if you get anywhere close, you have a pretty good chance of making that hurdle piece there. So one of the decisions you have to make as a campaign organizer is, what amount of money am I going to ask for? And the rule of thumb is you want to ask for as little as possible that will get you the money to fund your project or your product. If you tend to ask at a higher level, you basically tend to scare a lot of people off, and it's tough to get to that milestone. So, you actually see most of the projects on Kickstarter raise less than $10,000. So between $1,000 and $10,000, you see about 75,000 of the 133,000 projects raised between $1,000 and $10,000. So it's only out of the far right column you see for successfully funded projects, 263 have raised over $1 million. And you tend to hear about those because they get a lot of press. I mean, you see the Pebble watch, you see the coolest cooler, and so forth. So, but that's a small percentage. Just like in venture capital, I mean, a small percentage of companies get backed by venture capital funding. So you're starting to see similar numbers, but the numbers are larger in this case in terms of the number of projects that are out there. So you have Kickstarter as one of them. You have Indiegogo. And Kickstarter, by the way, is only doing donations, or I should say rewards and pre-sales. They will not get into equity, they said. Indiegogo does rewards, pre-sales, and now has moved into equity funding. Circle Up does equity funding. That's only for consumers. You have beta brands. So you can actually crowdfund a t-shirt, for example, so it's apparel. And then WeFunder, their big thing is you're investing in the local community. Nicholas, who's really pushing this piece, is big on that. They actually allow you to put money to, in this case, Legion M, which is films, Stan Lee. And they're actually allowing you to put money behind them. So if you wanted to support the actual platform, in this case, Start Engine, you can do that. I've done that, so I put a disclaimer on the bottom there. And this is what it looked like in terms of the campaign. And so you see that you can go through this. This is probably about a 10-page piece, if you actually printed this out. But this is, you read through this and you'd see the summary. You'd see what the terms were. In this case, it's what they call a crowd safe piece. It is equity crowdfunding in this case. It's tied to what's called a convertible debt note. And so they use a modification of the Y Combinator Accelerator's SAFE note. It does have some of the same aspects to it that you see in a normal SAFE note or convertible note, to where you have a valuation cap on there, and which is of interest to you as an investor. And then you also have a discount rate. Those are the two main components you want to look at when you're looking at putting money into a convertible note on an equity crowdfunding platform. So Indiegogo is partnered with a company out of Austin here called Micro Ventures to do their equity crowdfunding initiatives. So if you go on there today, you'll see the Napa Valley Distillery that proudly says they did not get hurt by the California fires that were taking place in the last couple of weeks. And then, you look at this, is that kind of shows it's a partnership piece there. So Indiegogo is not trying to do it themselves. They have partnered with someone that actually has an idea of what's dealing with equity crowdfunding initiatives, as well as what's called Regulation D raises, which is private placements for the most part. Republic is another one that does equity crowdfunding. And so talking about ag, you look at farm from a box. So you actually take a container and you have everything you need to run your farm within that, that crate or that container. And so that was an interesting piece that was funded back earlier this year there. So that's a ag equity play, or ag equity crowdfunding campaign there. And they're based out of the Bay Area. Start Engine is another one. They're out of LA, I believe. Put money behind them, just a disclaimer. And so you look at this, that's a interesting piece there. They've gotten some headway, and they actually have what's called an ICO summit. If you look in the top right corner of that slide, you're seeing basically Bitcoin type of raise, which is not totally dollar based. So I won't go into much of that. It's something that's fairly new, but Start Engine is pushing that going forward. Something that's local in terms of Fresno is actually Breakaway Funding and Fresno First. So Fresno First Bank. So they've actually partnered together. So a bank working with a equity crowdfunding platform. And what's good about that is if you have an equity crowdfunding campaign and you raise $100,000 through equity crowdfunding, the bank will then allow you to leverage that amount of money to go out and get a loan from them. And banks tend to not want to work with startups that don't have much in terms of tangible assets. So this is an interesting partnership. And their very first one was this one here, which is actually Full Circle Brewing, which is in downtown Fresno. And I'll use that as an example in just a little bit. It's currently in the midst of its raise. So we'll watch and see if they're able to raise their $300,000 up to $1 million and having the bank come in and either match those funds or use a certain multiple to loan a certain amount of money to Full Circle going forward. All right, I'll stop there. Thomas, any questions, or Elizabeth, do you have? All right, just let me know. Okay, so a couple example of crowdfunding campaigns. I spent time in Michigan, so this is a local campaign in Kalamazoo. What's interesting about this is what Kevin Romeo did is that he was putting together a film for craft beer in Michigan and how it moved forward. He started building a documentary and basically ran out of money. And he said, well, what can I do? And so he needed another $30,000 plus to get the final footage shot and to do the production and editing of it. So he went to Kickstarter and did this fund back.
Hi, John. I have a question from Thomas.
Yep.
He asks, what are the differences between the equity crowdfunding platforms? Do any have more access to investors over the others?
Okay. Yeah, so each platform, Thomas, will have a different investor base. And so if you look at I'll go back and look at these slides here. So right now, WeFunder and Start Engine tend to have a larger number of investors than the other ones I showed in regards to microventures, partnership with Indiegogo and Republic and the Breakaway Funding. So Breakaway Funding probably has the lowest number of investors because it's very specific in how they work, and they want to partner like with Fresno First and so forth. So one of the decisions you will need to make is, do I want to go after a niche platform, or do I want to go after a non-niche platform? So Kickstarter and Indiegogo will do any kind of campaign as long as it falls within their general guidelines. Kickstarter is a little more specific on what doesn't work for them, and Indiegogo will do just about any piece that allows you to write the story behind a project or a product or a service. You have niche pieces like there's one called Craft Fund out of Wisconsin, and when it was started when there were only intrastate crowdfunding, equity crowdfunding laws. And so you could actually go, and if you're a Wisconsin craft brewery, you could actually raise money through Craft Fund, which is at craftfund.com. And now, since you've actually opened it up to where you have a federal law through the Title III and Jobs Act, you actually have more investors come into the Craft Fund equity crowdfunding platform, as well as more breweries able to utilize that platform because no longer do they have to physically be in Wisconsin. But prior to the federal law being approved, it was very much a niche market. It limits the type of companies that would be out there. They had to be craft brewers, and they had to be based in Wisconsin. And then you had to actually, investors, you had to be in Wisconsin as well. But, it's kind of expanded now since you do have the federal law approved. So you have to kind of make a decision on that. The other example would be Circle Up. So Circle Up, you're going to get people that want to invest in consumer goods. And so that's probably going to be a bigger piece in terms of the number of investors that come in than if you'd have somebody that was focusing on that craft brewing piece, or what Breakaway is doing in regards to partnering with local banks. So that would be for investors there. Just so you understand too, some of the nuances that are different there is that you look at it from the perspective of, do they truly allow non-accredited investors to invest in the campaigns? So look at the Indiegogo and Microventures example. They do both crowdfunding campaigns, equity crowdfunding campaigns, as well as Regulation D campaigns. And so you have to be an accredited investor to do the Regulation D raises. And so you can register on Microventures, but if you're not an accredited investor, you can only see a percentage or small percentage of their campaigns, because you're only looking at the crowdfunding piece. If you are an accredited investor, you can also look at the Regulation D fundings or raises, as well as the equity crowdfunding pieces that are out there.
We have another question from Thomas.
Mm-hmm.
He asked, does a specialized platform result in more investment and successful fundraising because it is targeted than broad ones?
Yeah, that's, there's not enough data to really say yay or nay to that. But what happens is it ends up being to where if you're looking at it on a case-by-case basis, if you can't get eyes on your campaign, no matter what platform you use. For example, if you use Indiegogo, which they get thousands of investors looking at things, and they also get thousands of projects on there. If your campaign gets lost in there, it doesn't make a difference that there's potentially a lot of investors that look at it. If you can't get the editors of Indiegogo to highlight your project in a weekly email, then it really doesn't make that much of a difference if you're on Indiegogo or if you're on a no-name platform. So you really have to go and ask the platforms that you're interested in and compare them on a case-by-case basis and see if they think you can actually make any headway in getting eyeballs onto your campaign. So there's not enough data out there to say one way or the other, Thomas. So I can't really tell you from a scientific standpoint, but from an anecdotal standpoint, you got to take it case by case to understand what you're trying to do and who you're trying to target. There's a friend of mine who's a neighbor of mine in Michigan. He actually has been trying to work on local community crowdfunding platforms. And so the whole point behind that is that people aren't going to invest unless they have a connection to you in your community. And so if those ever take off, then what happens is you look at it from your perspective and say, let's use the full circle brewing example. If, is anyone outside of Fresno going to back a craft brewer in Fresno? And let's make the assumption that Full Circle is never going to sell outside of its brew pub in downtown Fresno. You're probably only going to get investors that have some tie to Fresno to invest, and those are probably going to be people that are physically located in that in Fresno. So if you went and did this on Indiegogo and used Microventures, you probably wouldn't be very successful in getting that backing. So what Full Circle is doing in regards to the equity crowdfunding and working with Breakaway and the Fresno First Bank, they're understanding their customer base that could possibly want to get involved in a ownership position in the company. Does that answer your question, Thomas? Okay, good. All right. So this kind of plays into it. The local campaign, the people that backed Kevin on Kickstarter, he actually had to push a lot of emails out and do a lot of social media pushes on Facebook and Twitter to get people in Michigan to get the backing for what he wanted to do to get the $34,500 to finish the film. It wasn't, as he would say when he came and talked to my classes, he said it wasn't easy. So to get over that hump of $30,000, he really had to spend a lot of time prior to the campaign and also during the campaign to get those 471 backers. And most of them did come from Michigan, not necessarily Kalamazoo, but in Michigan. So he ended up having to push that piece there. That was on a global site. That was Kickstarter. So he had to fight with, trying to get the eyeballs of people on it. One of the benefits of Kickstarter, they do have a filter to where if you say, I only want to see campaigns that are in Kalamazoo, you can sit there and get that filter and those alerts saying, all right, a new campaign's come on there. So, but only donors that understand that or backers will be, would find that. So out of those, 13 or 14 million backers on Kickstarter, how many are going to understand they can actually filter based upon location and based upon the type of campaign. So in this case, Kalamazoo, Michigan was the filter for geographical purposes, and documentary was the type of campaign as opposed to like food and beverage or art. All right. Also, just some of the do's. You look at this. So if you look at Kevin here, he has his name on the bottom right-hand corner of this profile. His company is Rhino Media, that actually was where he ran this campaign through. But he's also backed 16 other campaigns, and so reciprocity. So being able to pay it back or reciprocate is a big part of the culture in crowdfunding going forward. So he backed 16 campaigns prior to him getting his own funded campaign. So Thomas, I'm not sure if you end up backing other campaigns, but if you have, my question to you is, have you seen your active backing help you raise more money in those 2 campaigns that you ran? So that would be of interest. So this is the website that you see for Full Circle. And I go back to the previous slide. This is actually on the Kickstarter website. The benefit of working with breakaway funding is that you can actually set up your own website and then link it back to the investment offer on the breakaway site. And that's what Full Circle has done here. So you say, see our story, which is a video that's on their tapin.beer website. Learn how to view the offer, that's on their tapin.beer site. And then when you click on view investment offers, it finally takes you to the breakaway funding site. So it's of interest there. So again, I mentioned this is going on right now. It'll go on to, I think, until the end of November. That's when they close the round of funding, which is an equity crowdfunding campaign. You have a summary piece. One thing you want to get good at is summarizing all the details that you have to provide. In an equity crowdfunding campaign, there's more content and data provided than if you're doing a donation-based campaign or a rewards campaign or a pre-sales campaign. So you'll see on the right-hand side of the screen here a little snapshot of an offering memorandum. That is 20 or 30 pages that's filed with the SEC in plain text. And so you have the nice graphics and so forth in the pitch deck, but you have a detailed offering memorandum that Full Circle had to provide the SEC as well as the Form C for their regulation or equity crowdfunding campaign. They have their videos. You will see that if you want to have a successful campaign, be it equity, debt, rewards, donations, they having a video increases your odds for a successful raise. And so you have about a minute's video for Full Circle on there. Also, what happens as I bring this up is that you need to show that you've actually accomplished certain milestones. And so you'll see that this year, Full Circle has won a beer contest in the recent, I guess it was July is when they won this. And so even though it's a local campaign, they're still showing they've hit certain milestones. And that's important from an investor standpoint to say, all right, are they just coming off a business plan, which is all writing and assumptions, or are they actually executing and achieving certain milestones based on the previous funding that they've received or the previous activities that they've done prior to that equity crowdfunding? So this is what it looks like on the breakaway site. So you see that they're trying to raise $1 million. There's an error in this piece. So the unit price is actually $4, not $500. And you actually have what's called a Class B membership units pieces here. And you'll see in the top right corner, you actually have a use of proceeds. So whenever you're doing these equity raises, just like when you're doing a raise from an angel investor or a venture capital firm, you're going to show where you're going to be putting that money. And so if they're going to raise $1 million, you'll see that they're going to spend 42% of that on brew equipment and brew house remodel. And so from an investor standpoint, you want to see if that's actually going to increase the resources in that company so that you actually have an increase in sales, which is the ultimate goal of this company here. Okay. So I expanded this out here. So the target raise is $300,000, but the maximum raise is $1 million. I want to point out that you have Class B membership units in this case. So in the top right corner, you'll see you have Class A and Class B. So these shares or units, in this case, since it's an LLC organization, as opposed to a C Corp, you actually are getting different types of units than what the previous investors or owners have. And so Class A are going to have previous investors and the founders in it. Class B are going to be from this equity crowdfunding raise. And some of the things that are different, the main one that's different is that Class B does not have voting rights in the organization. So if you put money in this equity crowdfunding raise that Full Circle is doing, yes, you own a certain number of units or shares of the company, but you don't have the right to, for votes. So all the voting rights have gone into the Class A shares for units as opposed to the Class B membership shares. So you'll see at the bottom there saying voting rights, none. All right, cool. All right, so kind of going through different campaigns. You have a regional campaign. So this is in Ann Arbor, Michigan. It deals with hardware. They raised $1.5 million of a goal of $250,000 from 3,331 backers. Their biggest perk or reward was the actual unit itself. And so you actually have backers that are technically focused and they wanted this personal theater, mobile personal theater device that there's being built out of Michigan. So this is what it looked like here. If you have global campaigns, if you've ever been to Africa, you don't have very good Wi-Fi, and so you have what's called the brick that was developed. And so to be able to mass produce it and take it to market as opposed to be a prototype, they went and did a crowdfunding campaign. The goal was $125,000 raised. They raised $172,000 from a little bit over 1,000 backers. And the company was out of Kenya. All right. You look at social campaigns, and so this is a library, a mobile library out of Seattle. They were just trying to raise $4,000. They raised $5,345 from 157 backers. And so you can imagine that those 157 backers are from the, let's see, this is Seattle, I think it's Portland. Yeah, so Portland, Oregon. 99% of those backers are going to be from, Portland because they can feel the need for a library in downtown Portland. So, okay. All right, Thomas, you asked the question, does that mean later you don't have to do anything but notify them of activities for the Class B shares? So going back to the Full Circle piece, As part of the regulations of the equity crowdfunding Title III piece is that the company has to provide annual updates, just like you'd see in a publicly traded company. Yes, publicly traded companies have quarterly 10Ks that they are, sorry, 10Ks are annual. So they have quarterly reports that are due. As a campaign for equity or equity crowdfunding campaign, the company has to provide information on the results on an annual basis, but they don't have to sit there and give the, in this case, Class B share or units holders the proxy to vote for a change in the auditor or how much the CEO is going to make in terms of compensation and so forth. So of interest too is if you're an angel investor or if you were a venture capital firm putting money into Full Circle Brewing, you'd actually, if you put enough money into it, ask for a board seat. And so in asking for a board seat, you would get the rights to basically be one step closer than a shareholder, and that you'd actually handle some of the strategy and the focus, handle the compensation decisions of the top managers, and handle who's going to do the audit and so forth. But in an equity crowdfunding piece, you actually don't have any say of that either. And so I believe there's either one or only two members on the board of Full Circle. All right. So another question, Thomas. Most distractors of equity crowdfunding say it's hard to deal with all the small investors. Okay. Yeah. So if you look at it from the perspective of how do you manage the relationship or handle the relationship between your investors and the company. And the more investors you have in a straight equity raise, not an equity crowdfunding piece, the more complex it does get, and it gets frustrating that someone that's put in money that only gives them 1% ownership in the company is taking up 99% of the time of you working with investors can be kind of frustrating from an entrepreneur's perspective. You could actually write into your terms for your equity crowdfunding piece that you don't have the right to make a lot of interaction between the CEO and the investors. That said, when you write that in there, you're probably going to take away some of your pool of investors because they might want to get involved in your operations. That's why they're investing on it. So yes, to answer your question in regards to the voting rights, saying no to it, that does help with that relationship piece. The second way they end up doing that is if you look at how Micro Ventures does a lot of their equity crowdfunding pieces, is they set up a fund that you put that the equity crowdfunding investors put their money into, and that fund or special purpose entity would then take the ownership into that company. And so whoever ends up being the managing director of that fund is the one that has that relationship with the CEO, and it's not all 3,000 backers that are in that fund that can actually talk to or interface with that CEO on a cordial basis. So those are the two ways. So no voting rights, and then also setting up a special purpose entity that the crowdfunding equity investors put their money into, and that fund then takes the units or the money and buys those units in that company. So it creates another level of ownership, a little more complex, but you're seeing that when you have a large number of investors. Also, what happens is when you have a large number of investors, the SEC kicks in certain regulations that you have to be adhering to additional reporting rules. So companies, if they have over, I think it's 500 investors, it kicks off a trigger where company might have to adhere to more reporting regulations than if they had less than 500 backers or investors. And again, you can get around that by putting a special purpose entity in place. All the equity crowdfunding backers put money into that special purpose entity. That entity then buys the share of that company. So on what's called the cap table of that company, you see only one entity as opposed to those couple thousand equity investors. Did that address your question? Okay, good. All right, social campaign. Whoops. Okay. All right, you look at crowdfunding campaigns are also about creating a job, and so Luke Brown basically created this crowdfunding campaign because he lost his job. He's sitting in South Dakota, and he goes, "Look, I'm very good at woodworking. What can I do?" And so he came up with the beer hammer. So the beer hammer is actually made out of wood that he can get out of his backyard in South Dakota, and then you can actually open up beer bottles. So allowed him to create a job for himself. Digital media, so services you can crowdfund. Book publishing, anyone know Eric Ries? Eric Ries is big in the startup world. He created the Lean Startup Method. And so he actually crowdfunded this book called The Leader's Guide. And it's at the time, it might still be, was the largest fundraising, crowdfunding raise for a book. And it's $418,000 that he raised from almost 6,500 backers. Now, the interesting thing to me, and I ended up being one of the backers here, the interesting piece here is that this led to him creating another book that he didn't use a crowdfunding piece there, but he actually talked to all the backers, so all 6,500 backers, and said, "Hey, you backed the Leader's Guide. What interests you, and what would be the next book we want to work on?" And so he actually crowdsourced the content in the startup way from the backers of his Leader's Guide crowdfunding campaign. So that was eventually there. So it led to more books being published. So speaking of how things work, you look at this, it goes back to the slide I showed earlier that is crowdfunding replacing angel investing or venture capital, or is it just another piece into the process of growing your firm and receiving external funding? So on Indiegogo, a group actually created this product called Fret Zealot, which basically is a LED panel of lights that sits underneath the strings, and you actually can learn how to play the guitar. So when they created this, they were just looking at it as from a per project basis. So they're creating this, per product basis. They created this product called Fret Zealot. They raised $352,000 this summer, and you'll see them come to the markets in the next month or two. They end up creating two other products, one called DrinkMate and the other one called Vine Tracks. And so Sean, who's the lead CEO of now it's called Edge Tech Labs, crowdfunded the Fret Zealot product back on Indiegogo. He's now actually in the midst of a equity crowdfunding raise on Republic. Republic does equity crowdfunding raises, and he's trying to raise money for the company as opposed to the product. So it leads to another round of financing from the crowd, and it's not just at the product level, but now it's at the company level. And so the company Edge Tech Labs will have a combination of three products right now, and they're starting to get revenue off of those, as you'll see in that bottom bullet point on deal highlights. And the interesting thing here is that you had a product crowdfunding, which was pre-sales campaign of crowdfunding. They had a seed round of angel investors, and then now they're doing an equity crowdfunding raise that is going on Republic at this time. So caveat, I end up committing some money to this one. I thought it was interesting to see Sean's track record. And something we'll get to later on is one of the do's of a successful crowdfunding campaign is to actually reply quickly to questions that are asked by potential backers. And so on this page, you'll see that there's a discussion section on Republic for this crowdfunding campaign, and there's been 41 posts on there. And Sean has been the one that actually has gone back and quickly replied back to people. I posted a question on there, and he quickly replied in detail, which is really nice to see. All right, large campaigns. You see the Pebble watch is the biggest one out there, $20 million. The interesting piece is that it doesn't guarantee you success as a company. Pebble was bought by Fitbit for, I think, $23 million about a year ago. So they actually raised, $20 million for this second version of the watch. They had a $10 million or $7 or $10 million raise for the first version. So they raised close to $30 million through pre-product sales, and then they ended up getting bought by a company, Fitbits, for $23 million. And the last time I looked, the Pebble technology isn't continuing forward by the acquiring company in this case. So, but they were successful on a crowdfunding initiative. You also see the Coolest Cooler. They raised, or Ryan raised, $13.2 million. I bring this one up for a couple of reasons. This was the second instance of him doing the campaign. He actually was not successful in his first campaign. He was asking for more money than the $50,000 that you see here. He did it during the winter, and this product is a summer month product. He had a poor video. He did not have his prototype done. And so what he learned from the second one is that the timing is key. Having a good video is key. Having a prototype is key. And then finally, he learned that he leveraged the people that were early adopters in that first campaign to get the word out to other people when he did a second campaign. So he didn't just throw away the email list that he had from the backers from that first campaign. He actually said, hey, what can I do to move this thing forward? You all were interested in this. Why? And how can we get this to market? So, and then finally, he lowered his pledge goal to $50,000 as opposed to the higher amount that he had before that. All right, so I'll talk about something that ends up being talked about in the crowdfunding world is that there's lots of campaigns out there. You get lost in the noise, and it's interesting how some backers will back campaigns with no purpose. So in this case, it's called a potato salad. Zach, I believe he's out of Ohio. He got he was just playing around to see if he could get this thing to work. Was only asking for $10 for the potato salad recipe that's going to provide to people. He raised over $55,000 from close to 7,000 backers, and who would have guessed? And so here's the reward structure piece. That's if you put $1 in, and it says we'll be on our way to a successful potato salad. Not sure why people would end up doing this, but you had 2,000 backers put that money in there. And then he had, basically 21 backers that, pledged $110 or more for the platinum potato reward structure. So in this case, he did provide a recipe book, a shirt, and a hat. So, and a thank you. So it's kind of interesting, understanding who's going to be interested in what you're doing. And you got to find that niche. So before I conclude for this section, I just want to make sure we all understand that you have a lot of work to do on these campaigns. You have pre-campaign work, which is hard work. It deals with selecting the crowdfunding platform, which is one of the questions that Thomas mentioned. You have, write the copy of the story, create the graphics, develop the video, develop the reward structure, and then set up, the payment means. I know when I run this in classes, one of the most frustrating, pieces that the group has is they do all the video, the copy, and then all of a sudden they have to sit there and set up a PayPal account. They have to set up a Stripe account, and so forth, and they don't know how to do that, and then they're stuck in their campaign that needs to start today. And so you got to realize that there's that piece on the back end to be able to accept the money that you're trying to raise. So then you go to the actual active campaign, which shouldn't be any more than 30 to 45 days. That's harder work, and then actually the hardest work is actually producing the product you said you're going to produce after the campaign has been successful. All right, not easy, ongoing activities. It needs to be you. All right. So Thomas, you posted something here. Let's see. Click on the link here from the Guardian. All right. Oh, yeah, I remember. Yeah, the Cards Against Humanity raised to dig a hole to put things in, if I remember this correctly. That is an interesting, one. So you're right. Yeah. So you never know what's going to be pushing the buttons, getting people excited. Their potato salads. Digging a hole in this case, and putting stuff in there. So over $100,000 raised for that one, which was more than the potato salad one. All right. So Elizabeth, we're at about an hour right now for the talk. I was going to go into the do's here, which are interesting in regards to understand how to run a successful campaign. Can we get feedback from people if they want to continue or not?
Sure. Just message me and I'll let you know what they say.
Okay.
Thomas said he's interested in staying on.
Okay. All right. So I'll keep on going here. And please, let me know when to stop here. So the do's, and this is interesting from a perspective of running your own campaigns. And each campaign, or each platform, I should say, has a tutorial and has some do's and don'ts on how to run a successful campaign. So make sure you look at those. Indiegogo has a great one. Kickstarter has a great one. Breakaway has one. So the large and small platforms understand their user base, and you really want to get the nuances of what works on those campaigns. What I'm going to talk about is on a more general basis. And so you look at this and understand why people back projects. I know I had this slide earlier in the talk, but just want to go back to it. So what they're finding out is that, people want to rally around their friends' projects. So people you get the word out to your friends to be successful. Support people that you long admire. And then, inspired by a new idea. If that's going to be Elon Musk's next project and he does a crowdfunding campaign, people might get onto it. And then they're also inspired by the project's rewards. So if you look at it from the Oculus Rift's perspective, which was bought by Facebook, people were inspired by, getting the virtual reality goggles. And no one had really done a successful make of those goggles, and people thought that Oculus Rift would be the best one there. Now, when you add the debt and the equity crowdfunding aspect in it, there is a return on it. So when I put money into equity crowdfunding campaigns, I expect a return on my money. I might get zero. So one of the things is, just like with all the other types of campaigns, be it donations, be it rewards, pre-sales, equity and debt, you might get none of that money back. So understand that if you're backing. So understand that from an entrepreneur's perspective, that's you're talking to people that have these motivations. All right. So do's, what you want to do is you want to be saying thank you a lot to backers. So this is one that I backed out of Boulder, Colorado, called Bitsbox. I was tied to it because I code, and I like have my daughter learn how to code. So what Scott and Aiden did, that came out of a company, a Google funded company. They wanted to teach people to code at a young age, and so they created Bitsbox. And it was really an inspiring story. They're still moving things forward. but they would always keep us updated as backers and donors. This is a rewards campaign piece, and said thank you. And so that's a big piece. So that's a number one. You want to do it. So look at this. This is project update number 11. So you're constantly, are consistently keeping your backers updated. So this was the summary of the campaign. They had close to 3,000 backers. On Kickstarter, they were only asking for $45,000. They got about $250,000. Their reward structure was actually getting subscriptions to the BitBox. So that was a big piece on their reward structures. All right. So you also look at it, one way to get some exposure is have the staff or the editors of the platforms highlight you. And so this is basically an email that was sent to me by Kickstarter staff. And you'll see the Good Monster campaign, which is the third one in that list, was out of Kalamazoo, Michigan. And so I knew the backer there. But what happens is that I didn't know he was doing a campaign, and so but the staff picked up on it and actually pushed his campaign above what he was asking for, and he successfully was able to fund it. So if you can get the staff to enjoy your campaign, they're going to highlight it in their weekly emails and on their webpage. So when you're dealing with a Kickstarter campaign where there's thousands of campaigns, getting the staff to highlight your project is really important. All right. So you look at this. This is another staff pick. This one, is a hideaway bottle. So you see that green piece there. So when you're looking at the campaign and you see that this is a staff pick, it kind of lends itself to some credibility there. Again, the editor highlighting the projects. Another example, this one's on Indiegogo, right? This was in an email, so that they, Indiegogo, Kickstarter, they send out emails to their users to highlight certain projects. You also want to get the word out in regards to social media pieces to your friends. Remember, one of the things was, friends want to support friends on their campaigns, and that's the early adopters in many cases. Right? So I get an email that says, your friend funded a campaign. And it's like, okay, great. So if, friend XYZ funded a campaign, might lead me to actually fund that campaign as well. Also, understand the project length. A lot of people say, well, if I extend the project length, to the campaign piece to 90 days, is that going to get me more money? And what you find out is it does not. So there's a sweet point of 30 to 45 days. And I believe this data is from Kickstarter. And so you look at this, Kickstarter or Indiegogo. I have to go back and look at my notes on this. But you see a spike of money come in initially in the first 10% of the time period. And then you see a spike at the end, the last 10%. And there's a lull in between. So if you extend out the time, all you're doing is extending out the low parts, not highlighting the end parts where you get most of your funds. So you get most of your funds in the first 10% of your campaign in terms of time, and the last 10%. So understand that piece there. You see that in this chart that was actually done in 2014 in regards to when the line ends up being flat, that's telling you they're not getting as much money in as compared to the initial 10% of that project and the last 10% of that project in terms of campaign time. So this is highlighting the Pebble launch, the first one, and then highlighting the Coolest Cooler, and then, which is a game console. All right, so the other thing is the videos. So you look at the video pieces. So the videos, the average video of all projects is 6 to 10 minutes. But what happens is you want to get it closer to 3 to 4 minutes. So even though you have a lot to say, don't think about it from the viewer standpoint that you want to get it closer to 3 to 4 minutes. All right. Updates. You look at it from keeping the backers updated, and so You don't want to send them 10 updates a day. You look at it from every couple of days. If you have something important to say, send out an update on the campaign. And so each platform has a way for you to do updates of how things are going in the campaign, if you want to add stretch goals and so forth. And talking about stretch goals, 50% of them are using them. So stretch goals is that if I hit a certain funding level, I'm then going to be able to make either more products or add a color to my product and so forth. All right. You look at the rewards level, and so on the right-hand side of this piece is that you see the fewest was 9, which is Double Fine Adventure. Actually happened to back that one when it came out. So that's interesting. They do a lot of updates, by the way, and over a long period of time in regards to after the campaign's done. The most is 64 perks or 64 rewards. What you see is you don't want to do more than 10. So if you have more than 10, people get lost and they don't know what's to pick in regards to which tier I want to go after. Right? But you don't want to have 1 or 2 either, because you end up not giving people enough options in regards to $1 or is it $100? I actually have a $25 reward that provides a t-shirt. I have a $75 reward that provides the product and a t-shirt. Okay, so you look at problems that you see for campaigns. Clarity is a big part. Try to be as consistent and clear in all your content that you have for your campaigns. Make sure you have a call to action to help have the person do something. If that means to buy the product or push the like button or something like that. You want to have them be active, not passive in regards to donors. Don't expect to be found by you just posting a campaign. Have done all the content and just sitting back and doing nothing. You really have to go out and stoke the fire, talk to your friends, get them to talk about you and so forth. Another thing is that you see in the campaign ends up being about you as opposed to about the interest of others. And so if you look at the beehive one, it's about basically making it easier to be a beekeeper and to not harm the bees. That was a big part of it, and they get the $13 million. And then again, a lot of people want to put these buzzwords in there, put a lot of text in there, and really called bloat. Go ahead and remove anything that's repeating itself and it's not of value there. All right. Other things, again, have a crystal clear value proposition. Really be able to get this to where that the customer values this piece there. Right. And I'll have the slide deck I can give to you. So Elizabeth, yeah, I can give the slides and you guys will be able to go through these as well. Let me finish here. I'll go through 3 more slides, or 4 more slides here, just to kind of show you what Indiegogo looks at, and then I'll be done. Okay. Again, another way to look at it, this is Slava Rubin, who is a co-founder, and CEO of Indiegogo. Have a good pitch, be proactive, and find an audience that cares. And he says that if you basically raise $25,000 in the first week, you're 5 times more likely to hit your targets, which is interesting from the Indiegogo's perspective. Also, what happens is if you actually have 4+ people on a team, you'll raise 70% more. If you update more, you raise 4 times more. So this is actual data that is from Indiegogo. And then to put numbers on how much a good video is worth, what happens is you raise 114% more money if you have a video in your campaign, a good one, I should say. Right? And then finally, I'll end with this. If you go to crowdfunding.io, you have an entity that set up I would say a widget basically to help you decide if, what they predict how much you'll raise. I don't know how accurate this is, but it uses data from Go Get Funding Indiegogo, and Kickstarter. So just something fun for you to use going forward. All right, Elizabeth, I'm done. So any more questions? I'll hang out here.
Okay.
Also, I'll send you all the slide deck so y'all have this on your own computer.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. Does anybody have any questions for John before we end today?
Also in the slide deck, I have it there just in case you want to talk about it, but actually I show screenshots of what the user interface looks like on one platform. I think in this one I use Indiegogo, so you can actually see what information is needed for a crowdfunding campaign.
Okay, so I haven't seen any questions. I just want to say thank you so much for hosting this webinar today. I don't speak for everyone, but I know we've all found it really helpful and really informative.
Well, good. All right, thank you all for joining. I appreciate it. So again, feel free to ask me any questions going forward. All right.
Okay, thank you so much. I think we're good to go.
Perfect. Thanks, Elizabeth.
Have a nice day.
All right. See you, Thomas.